So this happened last week. I think I saw a skinwalker, or Wendigo. I live in southeastern Pennsylvania, and I know some people have seen skinwalkers in midwestern parts of Pennsylvania, but I never heard any stories from this side. I was in the car riding on my way to work, and I always look out the window. By the way, I wasn't the one driving. There are a lot of deer in my area, and I always see them very frequently. Now, there's an area not too far from my university that has some houses around, but there are a lot of wooded sections surrounding the houses. There's an area where a house was torn down, so there's nothing but weeds and overgrown grass there. While looking out the window, I see in that part what looks like a deer, only it looks like it's crouching down like a person does on its knees. Then it looked up, and I saw its face. It looked very distorted, like it was deformed. It even had horns, and its horns weren't even right, if that makes any sense. They seemed like they were just fake, sort of mangled, and it was just staring, not moving, which I have personally seen deer do before. But this thing looked very menacing. Its eyes weren't right. They weren't on the side of its face like they were supposed to be. They were in the front. I think that's what made it so weird looking. They were big dark eyes on the front of the face. What's freaking me out the most is even if skinwalkers or wendigos aren't real, this was a real creature. As we passed it, I didn't take my eyes off of it. Then when I couldn't see it anymore, I just looked ahead. And that's about it. But what's freaking me out the most is this was a real creature that wasn't a deer or an elk or any other known animal, especially for the area. I have no idea what this creature was, and I hope I never see it again. I grew up in central British Columbia, up on a mountain several miles from the nearest town, in the middle of nowhere to be exact. I was hiking a mountain when I was 21 years old. It was the middle of winter, and the snow was about 4 feet deep. I was walking along, and I see these big footprints that look like human footprints, but enormous. It almost seemed like they were bear prints, but they were unnaturally elongated and didn't have the normal claw tips. In the heel, one side of the prints were sprinkles of blood. Then I look way down, following the prints where they go, and I see what looks like a tall, hairy dude stepping through the crunchy, deep snow a few hundred feet away. That's when I ended up going the opposite way and just never looked back. To this day, I'm not sure what it was, but from what I remember, it was tall and skinny, looking like a bear walking upright through the snow. It may have been Bigfoot, but who knows? So I live in Australia, as I'm not really sure where to. If it makes any difference, I was born in the USA and have family there. I moved here when I was a baby. Supposedly, I have Native American bloodline from the Seneca tribe. It's currently autumn, and I live on the outskirts of a major city. This happened today when I went to hang some washing on the line under our carport. We were starting to lose daylight, so I thought I'd quickly pop out and hang up the last of the washing for the day. It was getting darker by the minute. I had just begun hanging clothes when I started to get an uneasy feeling. I'm unsure why. I brushed it off as I was losing daylight quickly. A minute later, I heard a group of kids up the other end of the street screaming, and then silence. Again, I brushed it off as the kids were just being kids and playing with each other. The intensity of unease grew. and I felt like I was being watched. I then heard a low growl, which was unlike anything I ever heard, and the air got colder, and all the crickets and bugs went silent. I moved the clothes rack to outside the carport so I could use what little light there was to hurry this up as much as possible. Which, hanging and scanning around between picking up the next piece of clothing, I noticed something new. This dense garden that wrapped around our U-shaped drive looked poor, like it had been trampled in a decent section. I then felt like I was really being watched by something, and right before finishing the clothes, the feeling started to ease off a little bit, and it began to warm back up, like it was when I initially came outside. I was raised with big dogs and grew up in the countryside. I heard all kinds of animal sounds, from wild dogs, foxes, fighting possums, and bats, but I had never heard in my life a growl like the one that I heard before, and I don't know how to explain it, but it didn't sound natural. It sounded close to a dog, but something about it was very wrong. Before going outside, my indoor cat desperately wanted to go outside. Once I came inside, she was acting completely different, skulking around and all fur puffed up. She was then following me at my ankles around the house, which actually is not normal for her. We have a lot of bushland surrounding us and live next to a river. I don't fish in that river anymore, as I always felt like someone was around. I also do have other strange experiences, which I might add in a future update. Skinwalkers. Yeah, I grew up on the reservation, and we just follow little rules at night to keep ourselves safe. They are real, 100%. My entire family has seen them. I have many native friends who have family members that are actually part of the Skinwalker community. I mean, I don't know how else to phrase it. Some of these rules are no whistling at night, don't say the name out loud, don't leave windows open on a full moon. One time we had one claw and cry at the side of our house on a full moon, so this is a personal rule that not many other people follow. We also have restricted places we can go at night because they are Navajo worshiping grounds. And for anybody who isn't Navajo, there are places you cannot visit legally because of Skinwalkers, religious practices, and sacred land masses. I do want to point out that, as a side note, most of the time they just look like normal people. They're not what the media makes them out to be. There are some non-native families living in our small town, and Skinwalkers are just a normal part of their life. My mother actually cared for one in a nursing home who didn't fully transition, and there were rules that she had to follow. Some of them are smearing ash on their foreheads before entering the Skinwalker's room, saying a Navajo sacred prayer, and never entering alone. There's also a few wild stories from her experience when it comes to physically caring for one, but it may be too long to add here. Now, most of them look like humans, but when it's not, it's a funky long creature that can take the form of anything with one abnormal thing attached to it, like a goat with 7 legs or a dog without a nose. They want that flesh of yours. So here are more extra tips to survive them. Living in the reservation is like playing a game of what the hell was that noise every night. If someone begins to smell like their flesh is rotting, run. If someone wants to take you to the reservation, politely say no and just move to another city. Don't ever come back, and pray. Pray to whoever you believe in. If you're not religious, pray to a random god, to anybody that comes to mind. Skinwalkers are demonic creatures. But if you're ever in the woods, and you hear some whistling, this is a calling sign that the Skinwalker is coming after you. This is something that happened to me about 2 years ago at my friend's house. She lived right across a fairly busy 2-lane road from the parking lot of our college campus. The other 5 people in the house were asleep, and it was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to smoke a cigarette because I couldn't sleep. I'm sitting on the front swing, and I hear some rustling. I figured it was any type of animal and ignored it. But then, I heard what sounded like something on 2 legs shuffle through the leaves on the sidewalk at a very fast pace. I became alert. I stand up, still smoking my cigarette, and look over at the right side of the property with the tiny evergreen bushes. Now, the parking lot is across the street. The lights are on at all hours, so it actually illuminates from behind, leaving me to only see silhouettes. I see something that may have been about 4 feet tall. It looked like it would be a little shorter than my chest height, and it was peeking out, looking at me. Like, it was curious. But I also felt like it was malicious, because I got this overwhelming sense of dread and fear. We stared at each other for what felt like 3 solid minutes. It almost felt like I was in a trance. The best way to describe the thing I saw would be like it was proportioned, but malnourished. Someone once suggested that it might be a little person, but I know for a fact it was not. This thing was very thin and perfectly proportioned, like a thin and sick child. I guess it kind of looked like that little guy from the Lord of the Rings movies. I looked down at my cigarette for more than a second, and when I looked back up, it was gone. I heard more movement, and that's when I said fuck this, and ran inside and locked the door behind me. Then, sitting on the couch, I was staring at the window when I suddenly saw something run across, blocking a portion of the light from the parking lot as it went by. For it to do this, it had to have been on the porch, where I was just outside. When I went to Mexico with my dad in the mid-80s, they lived in a rancho, and my dad told me to go to bed once because after midnight, some of the animals that have been cursed by witches start to talk, and they will come around looking for anyone who will talk with them. So if you live in a rancho, in a farm, or own livestock or animals of any kind, be careful if you hear them talking to you tonight. I live on a farm out in the middle of nowhere that raises sheep and goats. I get up every morning around 7 a.m. to go feed them. But something strange happened this morning. I went down to the fence and I saw something strange at the far end of the sheep pen. At first, I thought a sheep was hanging from the fence post, but as I got closer, I realized that the sheep was standing on its hind legs. The realization made me freeze in my tracks about 10 feet away from the animal. I just stood there in silence for a moment, and after maybe 30 seconds of standing still, the sheep turned around and looked at me. It didn't even seem fazed that I was watching it. And then, the scariest thing I ever experienced in my whole life, it said, "Good morning." And then it dropped back onto all fours and went to eat with the rest of the sheep. The voice, however, was definitely a man's voice, but it sounded off, like a man who had just been roundhouse kicked in the throat. I have no clue what happened here. I don't live anywhere near Skinwalker territory, so that's out of the question. And it wasn't malicious in any way. If anything, it was actually quite polite. As insane as that sounds, is there even such a thing as a harmless skinwalker? I know I wasn't seeing things, but I just don't have a clue what it could have been. Has anybody ever experienced something like this before? I have heard stories of how animals, especially goats, speak at night. Before I start the story, it's important for me to clarify that the paranormal here in America isn't seen the same as it is in Mexico, from where my father is from, and from who I heard this story. Here in America, at least from my personal experience, this is seen as nothing more than a cool and sometimes taboo subject to be into, and sometimes people consider it to be sort of a hobby. But in Mexico, on the other hand, it's seen from a much different point of view. This is part of our culture. The same stories that our great-grandparents heard are the same ones that are passed down to us. The stories of duendes, la llorona, nahuales, brujas, and even the devil himself. We're told at such a young age to treat these things with respect and to never take them lightly. To us, it's much more than just witnessing an old chair move on a blurry security camera, or maybe hearing footsteps in an empty room. It's part of our culture. So here's my story. My father is not the type of man to seek attention. He's a humble, honest, hard-working man, and as a result, I believe what he tells me. Since he could remember, he had the misfortune of being more sensitive to the paranormal than most people. What I mean by this is that all throughout his life, he has found himself face to face with most of the stories that we've been warned about. Even now, as a grown man, our entire family has grown accustomed to experiencing more than our fair share. It's almost as if this sort of stuff follows not only him around, but all of us, too. So this story takes place in Mexico, when he was maybe around 8 or 9. He was with his grandfather, who at the time worked as a watchman at one of his friend's stores. This specific store also functioned as a warehouse, similar to stores like Costco or Sam's Club, but on a much smaller scale. For those who are wondering, una bodega. It was around 11 o'clock when they arrived, well past sunset and into the night. My great-grandfather and his friend had struck a deal, and whenever he was on his shift, he could help himself to anything he wanted to eat, as long as he kept the list in order to make sure it wasn't marked down as stolen inventory. As they were getting ready for the night, my dad was told that he could choose anything he wanted to eat. My dad was excited to hear this, as it wasn't often that he was given the opportunity to choose anything from the store that wasn't a necessity without having to worry about having enough to pay for it. He wanted to make sure he made the most of this opportunity and decided to go around the store looking for what he wanted the most. He finally made up his mind and settled on a bottle of chocolate milk. Now, for those who are wondering, a bottle of chocolate milk is something valuable, especially depending on what part of Mexico you're in, compared to chocolate milk or milk overall over here in USA. So he started to make his way around the store and eventually found himself wandering the halls in search of the fridge aisle. After figuring out it was in the very back of the store, he rushed towards the low buzzing hum of the dozens of refrigerators. All he remembers was, and I'll say this in his words, an indescribable feeling of not only pure terror and true fear, but also an endless sense of despair. As he turned the corner, he was face to face with a very tall, thin man. My father tells me this man had to have been at least 2 meters tall. His initial reaction was to try and run away from him, but he couldn't. It was more than being just paralyzed with fear. he felt an endless empty pit inside him as well as around him. He doesn't remember the face of that man, and he doesn't know how much time passed. He had lost his sense of where he was, and at the time, could not for the life of him tell anything except for the fact that it was him and the man in front of him. He does remember, however, that this man was very well groomed and seemed very well kept. Despite not remembering his face, he does recall that he was staring straight at him. He doesn't remember what happened after. He only remembers coming to his senses on the floor in his grandfather's arms, being questioned about what happened. His face was full of tears. All he could manage to choke out was that the man was there, over and over. His grandfather's first thought was that someone had broken in, and he rushed my father back to the front of the store, where the only lockable room was located, the owner's office. He told my father to wait inside the office, and that no matter what, to not open the door for anyone. He would be back as soon as he checked the store to make sure it was safe. But the memory of the man was still all too fresh in my father's mind, and he decided that he would man up and be brave by running into the man again with his grandfather by his side, rather than remain alone inside the store again. Despite his grandfather believing it wasn't safe, he could see the terror in my father's eyes and complied with my father's wish. After checking through each aisle and deciding that the store was safe, they both headed back to the office, where my dad explained everything. For the most part, it seemed to be an isolated incident, as my great-grandfather later that morning told the owner what happened, and he claimed it was the first he had heard of anything of that type of stuff happening inside the store. It is worth noting, though, that the store was torn down not 2 months later after this incident, and the owner seemed to give no more of an explanation other than that he was losing money. Despite my dad not daring to outright say what he thinks he saw that night, it's more than apparent to me that based on his description of both the man and the feelings that overcame him, I think it's safe to assume that the man he saw was none other than the devil himself. This next story comes from Gallup, New Mexico. A Navajo woman, now in her late 60s, recalls a time when she is yet a little girl. She has this feeling there is someone outside their house. She runs to her father, who is still in bed, the sun just starting to come up. After finally begging her father to get up, he gets out of bed, puts on some shoes, and goes out to the yard to check. Walking around towards the side of the house to which her bedroom is situated, he notices what appears to be a coyote or dog prints there in the soil directly below her window. The strangest thing out of all this is that there is a trail consisting of only one clear print, and beside it, a round impression, which seems to sit a bit deeper. If there was a coyote outside her window, it was standing upright and on one canine-like foot, and something that's not canine-like. While he is making his way back into the house, something across the way catches his eye. There, upon a small hill to the other side of the dirt road, is a strange-looking old man. His eyes refracting the early sunlight, his hair long and yellowing, and his clothes worn and dirty, ripped apart. But what's more strange out of all this is that he is standing there, barefoot, missing the lower part of his other leg, and supporting himself with the aid of a simple cane of wood. This story is from Fort Belknap. 2 of my friends and I are by the street in front of my house, hanging out and talking. I noticed down the block, a ways underneath the halo of the street light, there's this dog. It's just sitting there, but it definitely is not one of the dogs from around the neighborhood, and there's something about it that just doesn't look right to me. I turn to my friends to see what they think, and when they look to where I'm pointing, the dog is gone. And out of nowhere, there's this guy dressed in some grubby clothes, long dirty hair, maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, and definitely in need of a shave. The funny thing though is that he's walking straight towards us and getting closer, but we still can't make out his eyes, almost as if he doesn't have any. Even though we were 3 against 1, without saying a word, we all just started running towards my house. Right up the porch we go, slamming the door behind us. No sooner are we inside, it's like every dog in the neighborhood is barking and whining as if they are scared. Then, just like that, everything gets real quiet, as if somebody hit the mute button. I'm not sure how long we stayed there crouched down low and against the wall beneath the windows. But finally, one of my friends elbows me in the shoulder and tells me with his head that I should take a look outside. Not wanting to look like a complete pussy, I move the curtain aside and peek out. I don't see anything, so I go and open the door. Whoever that guy was, he's gone, and everything seems as it always is. Needless to say, we hung out on the porch for the rest of the night. This story comes out of Arizona. 3 siblings are returning home to the reservation for a weekend visit with their parents. Their trip is taking them from Phoenix to the family home in Low Mountain and Pinyon. It's a trip of about 5 hours. They leave fairly late in the evening. As they approach Keams Canyon Highway, they turn onto a dirt road leading straight into Low Mountain. Just before they reach the dirt road, they notice an old lady bent from age and walking with a cane on the side of the highway. It is about 2 o'clock in the morning. She has a scarf over her head and a long black jacket beneath, and she is also wearing a green dress. Their only thought is that it's a late hour for walking along an isolated highway, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The reservation is really dark at night, and there is barely anyone driving on the roads. After they pass the old woman, they make the turn onto the dirt road. A mile later, they notice the same old lady, bent and walking with her cane there on the side of the dirt road. Spooked by the incident and finding no explanation that would provide for the woman's presence, they had been passed by no other vehicle since turning onto the back road. The older brother, who is driving, steps on the gas and puts distance between them and the roadside specter. Together, the 3 of them recite some words in Navajo to protect them from any dark medicine. Eventually, they reach the highway that leads to Chinle. As they come to the first overpass, they see that same old lady sitting on the shoulder pavement with her head down and waving the cane in the air. Before they can pass her by, the car stalls out, and they are required to roll to a stop a short distance past the woman. Desperately, the older brother attempts to get the car started, but there's no response. At this point, with all 3 of them panicking, the old lady stands up, facing the opposite way, so they can't see her face, and she walks to the other side of the road. Once there, she turns her head for but a moment, and they see that her face is painted black. She keeps walking and eventually disappears in the distance. Now, out of sight, the brother again turns the key in the ignition, and the car starts. They make it to their parents' home with no further encounters. When they tell their parents about the experience, their fathers tells them of an old Navajo couple with a house back in the trees somewhere between the two highways. They are rumored to practice bad medicine and bewitch people. From what he knows, the old man passed away recently, and ever since then, the old woman has been frequently been seen at night, walking the highways and the back roads. I heard this account from a guy that I knew. He was my friend when we were in a small town in Oklahoma with a decent size native population. Anyways, this guy, he's not actually Navajo, but he's Mexican. He's the nicest dude you would ever want to meet. He was about 35 at the time. He had a family. He was honest, a good-natured guy that I could never see making something up for no reason. But we were hanging out one night and we were telling scary stories, and he was telling me about the most scariest situation that he's ever been in. He said he was driving back to the US after visiting family in Mexico. His wife was in the passenger seat, asleep. He wasn't too far from the border, so he decided to keep driving a little after midnight instead of stopping somewhere for the night. It was sort of a desert type road. He says he was going about 65 miles per hour when he noticed something in his peripheral vision out in the darkness out the passenger window, and it was keeping up with him. Obviously, this got him shook. He hit the gas. 70, 75, 80, 85, and it was still keeping up with him. At this point, he thought he was going crazy. He thought it was just his tiredness playing tricks on his eyes, until it changed directions. Instead of moving parallel with his car, it began to angle back towards the road, in a manner almost to intercept the vehicle. As it got closer, more light hit it, and he said it looked like a human. He told me it was slightly shadowed from the darkness, but he was for sure it was a humanoid form. He then accelerated to 90, and a few seconds later, it angled back into the darkness and was gone. As he finished telling me the story, I could tell his eyes were welled up and his hands were trembling. And this was a tough, no BS dude. It physically struck him to the core just to recall it. Not surprising, he said he has never gone back to Mexico in a vehicle. Now, he said that whenever he does go visit, he only goes on flights. This story comes from Gallup, New Mexico. Family members are inside their home and getting ready for bed. All of a sudden, the dogs outside start raising a ruckus. The man of the family, including an uncle and some nephews, go outside to investigate, concerned about coyotes getting into the hen house. They think they see something moving about within the trees to the back of the house. The uncle picks up a handful of rocks and throws one after another into the trees. However, they hear or see nothing further outside of the ordinary, and so they end up returning to the house. With everything normal, the night is quiet and the dogs have stopped barking. They decide it's safe to go into bed. Just then, they hear a loud rustle from the trees, from the limbs whipping and branches snapping. They rush back out to the yard. All is quiet again. For 30 minutes or so, they stand guard, but not even the wind is blowing. The next morning, they go back outside and see that the gate to the hen house, as well as the door, is wide open. All of the birds are gone. The men end up searching the yard, and out by the outhouse, they discover, instead, an odd set of tracks going back and forth, as if something upon 2 feet was pacing between there and the trees. Finding no signs of the chickens, they return to the area around the hen house to look for similar tracks, knowing that only one person or someone similar could have opened the gate and the door. But the only marks they find are within the pen, and they all belong to chickens. The grandmother, who is standing at the back door of the house, tells them that it was a skinwalker. She says a prayer, and together they yell in a loud voice and in Navajo, "Go away, go bother someone else." It all started when summer came, and me and my 3 friends, Leah, Kathy, and Jennifer, were all planning to go camping. Leah asked her dad if he could drop us off, and he agreed. When the next day came, we started heading up. Leah's dad had set up the camper that we were using. He told us there were some spare blankets inside, in case we got cold. Leah's dad finally got into his truck and turned around. He stopped and rolled down his window and said, "No boys," to all of us. He then gave us a smile to let us know he was joking with us, and drove off. There was 3 rooms, 1 master bedroom, and 2 rooms with bunks. Each room had a TV in it, so nobody cared what room they got. Everyone knew that Jennifer didn't like small rooms, so we ended up letting her have the big room. I was in the room with Leah, and Kathy was in a room by herself. I started unpacking when we heard a loud noise outside. "Leah, did you hear that?" "Hear what? That noise?" We both looked at each other, startled, and then continued unpacking. But something seemed off. It was the fact that Leah was so chill about it. I was done unpacking, so I walked outside and started a fire. Jennifer walked out, and then she asked if I saw it. I responded with, "Saw what?" That's when she started freaking me out. She then started staring at me, but behind me, panicking. Her eyes darted back and forth, and then she was calm. I felt as if something was watching me, so I turned around, and I saw an orb in the corner of my eye, reddish, black, but by the time I turned around to fully look, it was gone. I was so freaked out, because we were in the middle of nowhere, you can say, and it was only the 3 of us, by ourselves. I then told Kathy that she could cook instead. We had her family's secret recipe of shepherd's pie, and a bunch of vanilla cupcakes. There were about a dozen cupcakes left in the open box, so we just left it on the table and went to bed. I could hear the TV coming from Kathy's room, so I punched the wall and told her to be quiet. Right after I said it, everything went quiet. But then, there was a small scream in the distance. It didn't sound human. It gave me chills that ran down my spine. But I ended up dozing off. But then, I woke up in the middle of the night, hearing noises, like if someone was in the kitchen. I wake up Leah, and then we walk out into a small hallway that led into the kitchen. We saw Jennifer sitting on the table, just staring straight ahead, with Kathy being right behind me. We were looking at her, and Jennifer was making weird noises, weird sounds. She was really creeping us out. She never did this or stared into space this often. But then I noticed something in the corner of my eye. It was a shadow. It was staring at Jennifer, and then it slowly turned to face me and Kathy. I froze. Kathy froze. Then Jennifer looked at us as if she was being mind controlled. And then this figure or shadow ran out the window. and Jennifer dropped her head into the table. We were trying to wake her up afterwards, but she wouldn't wake up. This experience still scares me to this day, and it is only one of the creepiest things I have ever seen. Me and the others are still very close friends. We even live together now. But we all remember that night and whatever it was that we saw. It turns out that Jennifer remembers seeing it in the daytime, but she says she doesn't remember anything when nighttime came and when we saw it. It freaks us out even more now, knowing that our friend wasn't even awake and staring into space with her eyes wide open. So I want to first say that I don't know much about skinwalkers and other creatures of similar nature. I just now started learning of their potential existence. So now I'm willing to learn and be educated even more on these topics, especially ever since I came across something at night. There's this park my girlfriend and we used to go to smoke there a lot, and we encountered this same dog-like thing multiple times, and it was always at night. It looked like a really huge black dog with round bear-like ears and yellowish eyes. The first few times we saw it, we didn't think much of it, but then we noticed that it kept just like spawning in. It never made a sound, and it always just stared at us, and it would follow us around the park in a creepy way. And just an FYI, we encountered this dog while we were high and while sober on many different occasions. Anyways, we ended up not going to that park no more. But before we stopped going, one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me happened at that park. We were walking from the parking lot to the park, and we would just see this thing emerge from behind a tree and follow us and try to block our path back to the car. Sometimes we had to run and jump a fence just to get away from it. We never had a single dangerous interaction outside of this one time we were at the deepest corner of the park that was bordering a small forest, and we had to jump about 2 fences to avoid that thing. I do have a theory. It could be a stray, but it really did not act like a dog at all. It didn't even feel alive. I felt like it was just actually watching us for some reason, but it was really eerie. I'm gonna start this off by saying it's a long read, but it's worth it. My friend and I were talking about this creepy experience we had, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. So I figured I'll turn to Reddit for some answers, if there are any. People might think that this is fake, but I don't care whether you believe it or not. I have no clue if this animal or creature is a skinwalker or just a very creepy animal. This took place around 2019, and I do live in Tennessee, right on the outskirts of the Appalachian Mountains. So here it goes. 2 of my friends and I were driving on a desolated back road at night. We were jamming to music and talking. Everything was normal. I was driving. My friend Hannah was in the passenger seat, being the DJ, and our friend Chris was in the back seat behind me. Hannah was trying to pull up a song on YouTube that wasn't on Spotify, so it was silent for a bit. While she was waiting on the website to load, Chris and I were still talking. We then came up on a small animal in the road, but I didn't think anything of it. Well, I expected the animal to move pretty quickly once it saw us coming down the road, but it didn't. As I got closer, I slowed down to let the animal have enough time to run off, but it still stayed very still. It almost looked frozen, and the closer I got, I could make out that it looked like some kind of cat. The only thing was, it didn't look like any sort of cat I ever seen. It looked like it had fur, but the fur was flesh colored. Its ears were very small, almost like the ears of a kitten, even though it was only a tiny bit bigger than a house cat. It was laying in a way that looked like the Sphinx was facing us. The scariest thing about it though was its eyes. Not to sound over dramatic, but its eyes literally looked like the pits of hell were burning inside of them. They were bright red, orange-like, and had twinkles of yellow in them that reflected off the headlights. As we got closer, the whole car was silent, and I just stared ahead. This cat scared the shit out of me, and it still wasn't moving. I felt a huge pit in my stomach and began having intense anxiety. It was almost like I was frozen, but I was not about to stop to figure out what this cat was. At this point, I had to steer around a bit to pass it without hitting it. I was like 3 inches away from touching this thing, and as I slowly crept by it, I watched it through the window the entire time. And it didn't even flinch, and the eyes still had the same glow, even without my headlights directly on it. After we passed it, about 5 seconds later, Chris yells, "What the fuck was that?" I immediately start freaking out and shout, "I don't know." Hannah looks up from her phone and says, What did y'all see?" She looked behind us and kept asking. We explained what happened and she said, "I didn't see anything behind us." Chris and I looked back, and sure enough, it was gone. We drove up the road to a church and turned around in the parking lot. We now wanted to get back to Hannah's as soon as possible. When we got back, we rushed in and told her mom what we saw. But we didn't mention that it looked like a cat. We described it as a small animal. Her mother stops for a minute and says, "Was it a cat?" We were blown away. We told her it was. And she said that her and a cousin came across the same exact thing when they were teens, only it was in a different area, and they saw it peeking out of the bushes. She still to this day doesn't know what it was, and she said that she thinks about it from time to time, even after 30 years. So I guess I want to know a few things. What was this? It didn't look like a bobcat, mountain lion, or fox. Is it a demon, skinwalker, wendigo, or unknown creature? I heard all of the legends regarding the woods at night. Don't look up in the trees. Don't respond if your mother calls your name. But everyone I have told this to tells me it was most likely a scared bobcat, or that they never heard of anything else before. So if anyone makes it this far and has some answers, I would greatly appreciate any answers. This happened directly to me. At the time of the story, I was a 12-year-old male who lived in California. For a summer trip, me and my family flew to Idaho for a week to stay with my cousins. We stayed at their house for 2 days, then came the best part, until what happened, that is. On the third day, we drove to a small city in the Rocky Mountains of central Idaho. They owned a cabin. The first day was fishing at nearby lakes, playing games, and meeting a few of the neighbors on the small street. Everyone we met was nice. It was amazing. I thought nothing could go wrong. Let me stop here, and before I say more, here's a layout of the area. The room where I slept was at the back of the house. There was no fence at the back of the backyard because it was on the bank of a freezing cold river. Directly on the other side of the river was a huge mountain covered by a thick forest of pine trees. A small path starts on the other side of the river, but there's no bridge. But there is a bridge a quarter of a mile down the road in front of our house. I went to bed that night and I woke up around 2 in the morning needing to use the bathroom. I got up and did my thing, then headed back to my room. As I got into bed, I felt hot, so I opened my window. Not even 15 minutes after I opened my window, I heard the most terrifying screech come from the forest. It was raspy, but a high-pitched voice. I know for a fact it wasn't human. I heard plenty of stories from YouTube channels that often describe creatures that make weird noises that sound sort of human, but aren't. I heard it once more, but this time, closer. I eventually fell asleep after not hearing it for a while again. In the morning when I woke up, we explored the town. At around 7 p.m., me and my sister and my cousins got permission from our parents to go explore the forest. I felt uneasy, considering the creepy human-like noises in the night that I was hearing. The oldest cousin, Alex, who was 16, took a loaded pistol, a lighter, and backpack of snacks. I carry a hunting knife and a flashlight. The cousin my age, Julia, took just a flashlight. My sister Brianna and the other cousin Karina, who were both 10, took some extra batteries and a small bag of candy each. We made our way across the bridge at the end of the street and back to the path on the side of the river across from the house. All of us began to hike to the top of the mountain. We made it to the top of the mountain in an hour and a half. The view from 9,000 feet was incredible. We then stayed a little bit longer up there, and at 8:55, Alex and I figured it was time to head down, and we ordered the group to the path. At this time, it was dark now, and the sun had fully set. Julia and I turned on our flashlights and shined them ahead as we walked. When we were halfway down the mountain, which was about 45 minutes into the walk, I got this dreadful feeling you get when you're being watched and followed. Seconds later, I heard something coming from the bushes, a few yards into the side of the path that we were walking on. I brushed it off as some type of small animal, and about 5 minutes after this, we heard a noise, and it gripped me with fear, and my heart dropped to my stomach. It was that same horrifying screech from last night, echoing through the forest from a mile or two away. I told everyone we needed to move faster, and we did. The noise went off again, but closer, and again, and closer. Whatever that thing was, it was moving faster than us. We were full on speed walking by then, but it still wasn't fast enough because soon the screeching stopped, and we heard loud steps 30 yards off to the right. I got that feeling that I was being watched again. Alex took his gun and fired 2 shots in the general direction of the steps. The creature backed off, but even though we thought it was gone, I still sensed we were being watched. As the river came into sight, it caught me and everyone else by surprise. I heard the path of gravel crunching behind us. As I looked back into the darkness, I saw the outline of something that resembled a human. I told Alex, and his face went pale when he looked. We told the rest of the group quietly, and on 3, we all broke out into a run towards the river. Whatever that thing was, it was extremely fast. When we reached the river, we figured there wasn't enough time to get to the bridge, which was still a quarter of a mile further along the side of the river. So we jumped in and swam across the ice-cold water. This thing got to the river just as we made it up to the bank and into the backyard. Julia and I shined our flashlights and finally got a good look at it. It was a massive, hairy creature that was about 7 feet tall. It had huge, razor-sharp claws like a bear. Its eyes glowed red when the flashlight shined on them. Alex then took a shot at it, and it darted off within one final screech. We all looked at each other scared. Alex then explained everything to our parents. They didn't know what to make of it, and had never heard of anything like it. I'm thankful that nothing happened to us, and also that I had noticed the creature behind us. If I hadn't, one of the others might not have noticed it until it was too late. The next time I stay at that cabin, I'm never going into those woods again. I'll never forget that night. I am a park ranger, and that is all you will learn about me, aside from this story. During the summer of 2008, I had been assigned to a watchtower in the middle of a heavily forest area. Most nights, it was uneventful, and I tended to just read a book as I waited for my shift to end. However, this night, when I started my shift, the guy I took over from was shaken up. Concerned, I asked what was wrong. All he did was shake his head and said, "There are things in the woods." He didn't say anything else and just left me standing there like a jackass. Jerk. Well, I set up for the night and took out my book. It was The Mailman, and I found myself surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Sometime around an hour into my shift, something struck the window. I jumped up and quickly sat the book down. Before checking it out, I had expected it was either a big bug or some poor bird. It was a bird, alright, but not what I had been expecting at all. This bird was dead long before it had collided with the window, both wings torn right off and stripped of all feathers. It was bound together with straps made from long grass blades. This was the clear evidence that this was man-made. I quickly took out my flashlight and began scanning the area beneath me. I couldn't see much through the woods. However, as I did a quick double take, I swear I saw a dark shape dart away from the light. I feel this needs some elaborating. I could barely make out anything, but when I brought my light over this thing, I only got a brief glimpse. I literally couldn't describe it for the life of me. This thing was fast. Too fast. Alright, listen up, you punks. If you're out there, show yourself right now. I used my most commanding voice possible. Nothing. As I drew my pistol, I heard the radio crackle. Naturally, I went to check and picked up the receiver. As I held it up to my ear, I could only hear static, so I at first assumed it was a glitch. But right as I decided to set it down, something stopped me. Call it intuition, something just wasn't right. And then I realized what it was. I could hear something over the radio. It was faint, so I really had to strain to hear it. Slowly, I could make out what sounded like faint, low humming. There was a pattern to it, a steady beat that started low, building up, then carefully dropped back down in an instant. I don't know how long I was listening to that humming sound, but eventually I turned off the radio, ready to radio it in. Then I realized I could still hear the humming. Without a second thought, I drew my pistol and turned around on my heel before steadily walking back outside. That humming sounded like it was all around me, following that same pattern. I still had to strain to make it out, but there was no question it was there. I swiveled around, pistol aimed at empty air. Every part of me was screaming to call for backup, but I wasn't sure what I needed backup for. I needed some proof of what I was dealing with, so I waited, on guard and ready, and then it stopped. As I became accustomed to the silence, I couldn't hear anything, not even a bug chirping. Cautiously turning my flashlight back on, I pointed it down at the base of the tower. Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Then, I heard a creak. I immediately spun around, processing this information. At first, I dismissed it as the wood, but then there was another creak, and another. Something was up here with me. It took me a few moments to realize that it was just around the corner. In that moment, fight or flight kicked in full gear, and I chose fight. I rounded the corner and found nothing. Absolutely nothing. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I was nervous, but I still had a job to do. And with no other option, I decided to call for backup, which I should have done that a long time ago. I realized that when I saw the receiver had been cut right off, I stared, dumbfounded by a few moments before grabbing my walkie-talkie instead. But when I turned it on, all I got was a harsh whine right in my ear, which caused me to drop it as I recovered. Once I immediately tried to find it, but it was gone. My situation was desperate. I was now completely cut off with some thing or other that seemed to defy all sense. If I was going to make it out of this, I had to stay put and wait for someone to come check on me. I still had my pistol drawn, waiting and waiting. I then quickly shined my flashlight outside one last time, and this time, I finally saw them, standing among the trees, staring up at me. They had been avoiding me all this time, so to see so many of them, you might be wondering what they were. And I'd rather not tell you for my sake. I was at my limit then, and screamed, turning off my flashlight and pointing my gun right at the door. There, I stayed for the rest of my shift, unwilling to move from that spot. I consider it a miracle I lasted for the rest of my shift. By the time someone finally arrived to see why I wasn't checking in, I poured out every single thing I had gone through. At first, the other ranger looked at me like I was crazy, but when he asked if I had any proof, something landed on the roof of his vehicle. It was another dead, naked, and wingless bird wrapped in grass. Needless to say, we booked it right out of there. When I got back and made a report about what happened, I demanded to speak with the last guy who had been on the previous shift. I really wanted him to have it for not warning me of what was out there. But here's the thing, we never found him. We searched high and low, checked every single record for a trace. We tried to look up his name when we could remember it, but it seemed like he never existed in the first place. So, what the hell took his shift? I saw some videos about skinwalkers on TikTok, so I started watching videos about them on YouTube, and there was a whole podcast where this guy just read stories about them from Reddit and other stories that people submitted. Our ward at church purchased a piece of land way back in the day. It's seriously just wooded area with a little bit of swamp. We would always go there for campouts and scouts, and at night, when it was pitch black, we would all play manhunt. Well, one time, we all got down to one person whose name was David. Growing up, he was super fast, and he would hide really good, so nobody could ever find him. He would always end up being the last person. Well, one time, it was down to David, and we had split up and gone way deep in the forest towards the swamp because it seems like it was impossible to find him. We thought he might have gone a little bit further than we normally go. We started getting into some more muddy and wet terrain as we get closer to a swamp-like area where the water is most likely shin deep. And we saw David way out in the swamp, and he wasn't wearing a shirt. And with the spotlight on him, he looked super pale, but he just stood there and didn't say a word. You could seriously tell something was off. Then, all of a sudden, we heard David from behind us, yelling, trying to get our attention, so we would keep trying to chase him down. Meaning, what we saw in front of us was definitely not him. So being a bunch of 12 to 17-year-old boys, we started yelling and running back to the campsite as fast as we could. Nobody believed us. In fact, for years everybody made fun of it, calling the ghost of David. But then I started listening to these stories, and every single one of them sounds just like what happened in some way or another. I am Navajo. We had an incident with an unwelcome visitor in our home. Here's what happened. My cousin is sleeping over. He's the same age as me. We're both 13 at this time. We're in my room, talking and hanging out. It is around maybe 11 p.m. It is a pleasant summer evening, so my window is wide open. It's also pretty dark outside, and my dad is in the living room watching TV. But as always, he's dozed off on the couch. My mom has already gone to bed. My cousin and I are keeping it down, but we're not ready yet to call it a night. All of a sudden, we hear the screen door to the front of the house open and slam shut. We think it's my dad. My mom, she tells us the next day she hears footsteps on the carpet. Whoever it is, she says, goes through her room and towards the bathroom, so she naturally assumes it's my dad. Then she realizes that she's unable to move, as if she's paralyzed. Still, in my room, my cousin and I again hear the screen door open and slam, only this time more loud. It wakes up my dad, and he comes to my bedroom to check on us. Finding us both there, he wants to know which one of my friends just slipped out of the house. It takes a few minutes, but we convince him we were by ourselves, and that we thought it was him going in and out. I can see by the look on his face, he's not really buying it, but he has to admit we don't seem to be lying. He then leaves, and as he's closing the door to my room, he tells us to stay out of trouble and go to sleep. All we could do is shrug. The next morning, my mom tells us about what she heard and how she could not move. She also tells us that the second time the door slams, she then hears what sounds like a horse galloping by her bedroom window. She then has all of us pray, and now, every year, we hike up the mountain to a high point and we pray for protection from evil. This event happened just south of Polaca, Arizona, within the Navajo reservation. A pair of skinwalkers, they say an old couple that lived deep back in the reservation, were seen lurking around this small cattle ranch. 2 heifers had disappeared recently, one of which was discovered down by the creek and mutilated. The man who owned the ranch, his 2 sons, and his brother armed themselves and went out to try to run them off. One of the sons, not yet 18 years of age, was searching out beyond the barn when a dark shape, materializing from the darkness itself, loomed up in front of him, almost nose to nose. As the boy attempted to raise his rifle, the figure raised its hands up to its face as if it was going to yell something. The boy, trying not to look at it in the eyes, then felt something rush into his face, like dust or sand. Even though he tried not to, he ended up taking a breath, and some of it was inhaled in. Immediately, things went dark, and he started experiencing hallucinations. The others found him only minutes later, on his knees, holding the sides of his head, and his eyes rolled back. He fell to the ground and went into some sort of trance. His body limped, and he became unresponsive. They carried him back to the house, and they summoned the local medicine man, who came and said some prayers over him, but he told the others there was nothing to be done but to wait for the dust, traces of which were still on his face and his shirt, to wear off. He promised he would come back the next day when the sun was up and bless the Hogan. Later, after he had regained consciousness, the boy swore to the others that he was the victim of a dog-faced creature. He described it as not quite as tall as he is, thin and scraggly, with patches of mangy and dark hair, a canine snout only shorter than a dog's, and with the smell of rotten eggs or worse. He said he doesn't recall anything more before passing out, other than not being able to breathe and having no control over his own body. I was only 17 at the time. On this specific night, I woke up feeling thirsty. I'm just lying there, staring into the dark, and deciding if it's worth the effort to get up and get something to drink. I'm sure we all been in that situation plenty of times before. So tonight, when you're in bed and you're questioning if you should get up and get some water, remember the story. So all I can hear is the clock ticking down the hallway and the muted silence. It's just way too quiet. I check the time on my cell phone. It's a few minutes short of 2:30 a.m. I then decide to sit up and get out the bed. I then make my way towards the door of my bedroom. It's really dark. I go down the hallway towards the kitchen. As I get out to the living room, I chance to look to my right and in the direction of the front door to the house. The only light is coming from a street light that is down at the end of the property and not all that far away. There, at the inside of the door, inside the house, I see this figure standing there. Its face at first appears human, then serpent-like, and then back to human, as if it can't decide how it wants to present itself to me. For some reason, I'm just standing there taking this all in. I'm not afraid, but I don't feel like I have any control over my senses either. And I'm not sure if I could move or have said anything, even if I wanted to, which at the time, I can't say I did. As the two of us are standing face to face, he assumes his human features. His face is fully painted, a thick stripe of black across his eyes, and the rest white. He has a feather woven into the hair at the top of his head. He looks young, not much older than me. He is bare-chested, not real muscular, but definitely cut. His torso is painted red. His lower half is covered in what looks to be khaki colored pants, well worn and faded, cut off and frayed just below the knees. He is barefooted, but his wrists and ankles are wrapped with animal skin of some sort. It is hairy and light, colored like that of a coyote. He doesn't say anything to me, not aloud anyway, but I do hear his words in my head, although for the life of me, I can't remember any of it. It's as if he at the same time, with this cold stare of his, is pinching away layers of my memory. I do remember wondering why he is in my house, and having the idea that he was expecting to find someone else. Just then, without even thinking about it, my cell phone in my hand, I begin dialing 911. With the phone ringing, I look back to the painted stranger. He gives me a thin smile and vanishes through the door, which by the way is closed and locked. To the other side, I hear what sounds like a horse galloping away. I move over to the door and pull it open. I see this figure taking long strides across my yard, away from the light and out into the street. There's a car parked on the other side. He goes around to the passenger side, ducks down and into the car, and it drives off. It all happens in a matter of seconds. I then realize there's a police operator talking back to me from the phone. I tell her there was someone in my house, but I leave out the part about his changing appearance and leaving through a closed door. The operator, or whoever she was, tells me not to worry about it. She says that I'm not the first caller of this kind on this night. She tells me to say a prayer, telling me that she too is Navajo and to go back to bed and that I won't be bothered by it anymore. This is not a story, but a real life event that actually happened to me. I live in a small town in Kentucky where there is nothing, no hope, no jobs, and nothing but churches all around. I was at church one night, and this preacher put his hand on my head and prayed that God would reveal himself to me. He then went on to the next person to pray. I got up and started walking towards the exit of the church. All the jumping and shouting was scaring me, and honestly, it feels nothing of God. It seems like it's more the perks kicking in than anything else. As I left out the door, I went outside to smoke. I walk around the building, and there's a little creek behind the church, so I ended up walking back behind there. As I was standing out there, smoking a cigarette, the hair stood up on my neck, and I got the feeling that I was being watched. I noticed across the creek, and between a bunch of trees, was a pair of red eyes, but they didn't seem scary nor evil. They just seemed curious, interested. I stared back at it, and it felt like we were staring for hours, but it was just a few minutes. There was nothing, no movement, no blinking, nothing. I then heard somebody walking behind me. I turned back, and I saw it was another person who was also coming outside to smoke a cigarette. As I turned back around, the creature, or this thing, was gone. After talking and smoking, we both went back into the church, and I never saw the eyes again. I still wonder what that thing was, whatever it was. It couldn't have been an angel or God. I'm starting to think it was the devil waiting outside the church. To give you a little more insight about me, this story happened when I was 14 years old. I was at my friend Emily's house, since back then I lived there for personal reasons. Anyways, it was about 1 in the morning and her parents were gone for the night. We were watching scary movies and eating out on snacks like we usually would every weekend night. After our movie, I got up to go to the restroom, and I let my friend know that I would be back. She nodded before opening up her laptop to message her boyfriend at the time. As I walked down the dark hallway, and I was coming across the bathroom, I heard my friend's voice call out to me, but it was coming from the back porch that was on the right side of the hallway, which immediately struck me as odd because I never seen her leave the room or even walk past me. And why would she be outside anyways at this time? Her voice called out to me again, so I couldn't help it but walk out to the back porch. It does take a lot to scare me after all, so I wasn't bothered by this. As it turns out, it was the biggest mistake ever. A red flag should have went off right then and there when her voice became silent as I stepped outside. I called her name softly, but she didn't reply. I called her name once more, but this time, louder. And again, nothing but silence. I stepped off the porch into the grass looking into her wooded backyard, a little pissed off now because at that time, I figured she was trying to prank scare me, like she always was. It was a normal thing for her, but when I yelled her name again, a voice spoke. But it wasn't hers. It was another woman's voice. Help me, please, for the love of God, help me. Okay, now I was officially freaked out because there was no one around for miles besides her one neighbor that lives a little ways into the woods. I found myself not being able to move. Curiosity maybe? But the bushes started rustling and what looked like a dog stepped out. At first I thought it was her neighbor's dog that must have gotten out again because it has happened before. But when this thing stood up on its hind legs, it was about 7 feet tall. That's when I really froze up. What the hell was this thing? I asked myself. I never met any human that's this tall in my entire life. Then it started to move towards me. It was walking kind of like a human, but wobbling like a baby taking its first steps. I found myself not being able to move, to get out of there like I should have. That is, until I heard the slider door being opened, and the real Emily's voice speak. Lana, what are you doing outside? I looked around my whole house for you. As soon as she finished her sentence, I ran inside as fast as I could, and pulled my friend inside before shutting the door, and locking it while closing the blinds. I did this to every room, even the basement, locking all the windows included. All the while, Emily yelling at me, asking me what the fuck was going on. I took her arm and raced into her room before slamming her door behind us. When she finally realized how terrified I was and how badly I was shaking, only then did she ask me, Jesus, Lana, what's the matter? You look like you just seen a ghost. I finally calmed down enough to begin to tell her what I encountered, but before I got the chance to fully explain what happened, I heard extreme banging on my friend's window, which shocked us both and we both shot up at least 10 feet in the air. I whispered, fuck. I realized I forgot to shut the blinds. I didn't have the heart to turn around, but when Emily's face went pale, I didn't have a choice but to look behind me. I really wish I hadn't. There, that thing was, looking into our bedroom window. I couldn't even begin to explain what it looked like. All I can come up with is that its body was twisted like someone that had just been in a freakish car accident, and it had fur, lots of it, and the eyes glowed much like a cat. A high-pitched noise escaped that thing's throat, making us not only cover our ears, but we both screamed as hard as our lungs would let us. I threw my friend on the floor before zooming into her parents' room to get her dad's .42 rifle. But when I came back, the noise stopped, and that creature was gone. Emily was rocking back and forth, holding her knees close to her, shaking and crying. She saw its face as clear as I did. The rest of the night, we had all the lights on in the house, and we stayed huddled together in the living room with the rifle right under my legs. Finally, after what seemed like years, the sun rose and her parents walked through the door. Instantly, her dad noticed our fear-stricken expressions and his gun under my legs. They sat down and softly asked both of us what happened. When I explained it, they shared worried glances before announcing that we were moving. We never asked why. We were just happy to get the hell out of there. We moved that exact day to my family's vacation home in a very populated city with little to no trees. When my own parents got home and we told them, they had the same reactions. And they told me I could never go out after dark alone and to stay away from wooded areas. Of course, I never questioned it. And to this day, I don't know if it was a skinwalker that some people believe in, or if it was an imposter. What I do know, though, that it was not human. My mom recently shared a strange and creepy experience that she and her siblings and parents witnessed when she was younger, at around 6 years of age. My mom is not the type of person to lie about this just to scare someone. And also, my aunts and uncles have verified the story individually. My grandparents, mother, aunts, and uncles lived in a small pueblo, a small town, in Mexico with a population of about 1,000 people. They were all scattered throughout the landscape. They lived at the bottom of one of the larger cerros, or hills, that would take a couple of hours to get to the very top. My abuelitos were very poor. My grandfather was making just enough to provide for their necessities by working at a sugar cane field. But yet they were living in one of the nicer homes because of its proximity to the hill and what everyone would say, a witch's house at the top of that hill. Everybody around there stayed away from that house, and the rent was the cheapest there was out of everything else, out of all the other houses that were available. My abuelitos, grandparents, tias y tios, aunts and uncles, and my mom had some paranormal experiences in that house. Most of these were attributed to the witch in typical Mexican folklore fashion. This thing that they witnessed, however, was what made them leave. Mi madre, my mom, says that one day she was inside at the entrance of the home with the door wide open, playing with some toys. My tios and tias, aunts and uncles, were in the same room behind her also, while my abuelito was relaxing on a rocking chair in that room. She said she was playing and the door to the house was open. As she looked up, as a medium-sized black dog was walking along the road in front of the home. What spooked her was that this dog had 2 human breasts hanging from its chest that were connected to its skin as if it was part of its body. She says that the breasts were hairless, which allowed her to see that they were indeed the breast of a human and not some sort of tumor on the dog. My mom says that the dog instantly gave her a very bad feeling and she started to cry. My mom's crying then caused the dog to stop in its tracks and look into the doorway towards my mom. That's when my grandfather got up and headed towards the door, as so did my uncles, to see what was happening. He instantly recognized what the creature was and pulled out a small gun he always carried with him because of the long treks he made on foot to his job. He aimed the gun and tried pulling the trigger, but the gun kept jamming and would not fire. He tried it a few times, each time checking and making sure the gun was in proper working order, but it simply would not fire. All the while, the dog was just standing there, watching. The dog eventually turned and started running down the road and into some overgrowth along the side of the road. After it disappeared from view, my grandfather tried shooting his gun, and it fired without a hitch. Even though they were very limited financial-wise, they moved out within a week after this encounter. Unfortunately, both of my grandparents passed when I was very young, so I cannot ask them about this event. I also never heard of skinwalkers partially changing, turning, and I found the story quite interesting. Sometimes, when we gather together as a family, joking and playing and having a good time, I tell my mom to bring up this story just to give everybody a spook. In a quick summary, that she saw a black dog with human breast hanging from its chest. Grandfather's firearm jammed when he was trying to fire at the dog, and then the gun started working perfectly fine once this dog ran away. Most of my family, when they hear this story, believe it was the bruja, the witch, who lived on top of the cerro, the hill, who apparently, they always say, was a nagual. My mom told me about an experience that she had when she encountered a nagual in the place where my mom grew up. She said that a group of town people were saying that they were seeing a large black bird out at night and it was creeping people out. So one day, some guys got in a truck and encountered a large black bird in the middle of the road following them. One guy took a shot at it, and they said that the bullet went through its wing and it flew away. But they recall that when they shot it, they heard the scream, the wail of a woman. Later on, they noticed that an old lady who lived in an isolated home by herself all of a sudden had her arm in a sling and she had a wound from a gunshot. She had already been suspected of being a bruja or a nagual, and they believe that this incident confirmed it. I'm not Navajo or Native or even Indian, but I have a skinwalker story. So here it goes. I go along with a friend to check out his grandfather's hogan. For those who don't know, a hogan is basically an old traditional Navajo dwelling place, mostly made out of logs and mud, with a door traditionally facing east. Anyways, his grandfather is in the hospital for a spell. My friend says that his grandfather had an accident there on the property. We get to the place and we're hanging out for a while, drinking some beers and sharing a blunt. When out of nowhere, my friend goes real still and puts his finger up to his lips like he wants me to be quiet. I hear this shuffling noise coming from just outside. And just an FYI, my friend has dark skin. So as I look at him, his face turns several shades more pale. The shuffling noise becomes more loud, as if someone is coming towards the door. My friend grabs a piece of burning firewood out of the stove. He goes over to the door and hurls it out in front of the hogan. We then hear it hit the ground, and immediately there is this high-pitched laughter, something like the Wicked Witch of the West. Every hair on my body stands up. My friend starts yelling out in some native language. All I can do is pull out my pocket knife and hold it up to be ready. The person outside just keeps laughing, and I finally get the cojones to move over towards the door and peek out. My heart nearly jumps out of my chest. Only several feet from me is this skinwalker. It's leaning up against the wall just to the right, thin and scraggly, covered with these animal skins, and staring back at me with these eyes like black marbles. I'm convinced it's a woman, as I see what looks to be breasts beneath the skins, but thin and sagging, like she's really old. Her face is covered with splotches of hair, and I can't tell if it's real or some kind of get-up. I let out a bit of scream, though I hate to admit it, and it just turns and jogs off towards the hills to the other side of the Hogan. That's the only time I've seen a skinwalker since, and I hope I never see one again. To start this off, there are 0 bears, moose, or elk where I lived at the time. At the time I was around 12 or 14, and I was with my friend, who I will call Kayla. We planned on going on a picnic around her fields. As we walked up a smaller hill, Kayla pushed me to the ground and whispered, "Do you see that?" At least 20 or so feet away, there was a dark figure. It was standing on 4 thin limbs, and its head was narrow, similar to a horse or a deer, but it was completely black. I couldn't make out the features, but it had a mane like a lion. The mane-like fur ran along its back, stopping near the rear, and it also had no tail. Here's a side note: all of the cattle were moved to a completely different area, nowhere near this one, so no other livestock animals were in those fields. But this thing was just staring off. Suddenly, my friend stood up and made a rush for the exit that was at least 2 miles away. I didn't hesitate to follow her. We finally stopped near the latch fence that leads to where she stays at, and we looked back. It was slowly walking back into the trees. This sight, to this day, still gives me chills. I guess I'll start with a background. I'm a 33-year-old female, but the story takes place when I was a teenager, living in the suburb of Chicago. The village I lived in was quiet and middle class. We lived like a mile from the police station, and the worst crimes we had was a murder or two and robbery once in a blue moon. 99% of the time, boring and more boring. Unless you had a car, you were stuck just walking around the park at night with your friends, which was kind of boring. But anyways, one night, my girlfriend and I decided to go hang out at a park with some guys at like 12 a.m. The night was a bit windy and had a full moon. I even got a kiss that night from the boy that I liked, but the night wasn't just fun and hanging out late. There's a deep forest in the park with a stream with a playground right next to it. The same playground we went to with swings and jungle gym columns. There's a bridge, the one that everyone uses, and another bridge made of rocks that's barely used because it's deeper in the forest. They're both over the stream, connecting the forest and park area. I'll get to the rock bridge in a minute. We hung around on the swings and chatted and just spent the evening together. I'm sitting down and just looking around, talking and enjoying the peace and quiet and the moonlight. I have a full view of the forest. I then see something moving deep in the woods, some dark shape. It looked like it was crawling out of the forest, an arm, then another arm. Then it pulls itself out of the stream. This figure happens to be darker than the surrounding forest. As I'm just sitting there, frozen, I think I'm seeing things. And it just kind of lays there on the ground, but it doesn't move. A flash of fear comes across me. What if it comes this way? I then look over to my friends, and no one notices anything. I look back, and it's gone. Did it go back or go somewhere? At this point, I really want to get out of there. Then, one of my friends is asking all of us, "Did you guys hear about the urban legend of the rock bridge over the stream? Apparently, some kids or something played on the bridge and fell over and died." What a thing to say after what I saw, but I didn't ask anyone anything and just pretended that I never saw anything. But this experience stuck with me. I never talked about it because it must have been my imagination. Things like that only happen in scary movies, right? After all of this, I rarely went to the park after that. Who knows what would have happened if this black thing saw me the same time that I saw it. Growing up in San Antonio, I was always fascinated by the local urban legends and ghost stories. Even going as far as visiting a few of the haunted sites where some of the rumored specters lived. If you ever lived in South Texas, you know about many of them yourself. Here, I will post any experience and any account of my friends and acquaintances that have experienced any of these legends. I started elementary school in 1980 at Westward Terrace in San Antonio, Texas. All throughout my school days, I heard many local legends. Now, the way I heard it, back in the 50s, a young woman had been in a fire. My wife says she heard the donkey lady had lost 2 children in that fire, and her husband is actually the one who started the fire. She was left horribly disfigured. It was said that when her face healed, all the skin had something of a droopy, baggy appearance. Her fingers had all fused together, leaving dark stumps or hooves. Disfigured and totally insane, she stayed mostly in the areas of Bexar County and brought terror among anyone who approached her. As children, when we could stay out late on summer nights, we would all describe what we thought she looked like. We were absolutely positive she waited in the darkness for us to separate so she could pounce on a lone victim, ripping and chewing. You get the idea. Most of the donkey lady stories have faded into memory, but one was a little harder to shake. One of my best friends told me about a cousin who was with his father and brother on a weekend outing. They were going to camp and do a little fishing in a county park. The group pulled up to a weed-infested area off a dirt road and began to make camp. The 2 boys had the task of unloading the pickup truck, while the father found a suitable spot for the tent. While they were unloading the truck, one of the boys heard a rustling in the weeds just ahead of the truck. He told his brother, who in turn called out to their father to come back to the truck. The 3 of them watched the tall weeds beneath the oaks away from the road bend under the weight of what was apparently a large animal. Then they heard a strange, snorting sound and a high-pitched snarl. The father, not recognizing the sounds coming from this animal, decided they should find another spot to set up camp. The 3 of them quickly threw the tent, sleeping bags, and gear into the back of their truck. While packing up, the father watched out of the corner of his eye as the weeds shook nearby. Whatever or whoever this was moved away from the trees and began heading for the general area of the road. The father urgently whispered for the boys to get in the truck fast. All 3 of them were in the truck in a flash, and the father started the truck up. He put the truck into gear and was just pulling out in the road when something fast and large burst out of the weeds and ran at the front of the truck. Seconds later, something bounded up onto their hood and began shrieking at them through the glass. It was the ugliest thing any of them ever saw. They swore it looked like a donkey, but it was mostly human. It then screamed at them more as the truck continued to move away from the weeds and into the road. It used its deformed hands to punch at the windshield and broke it in many places. The father hit the brakes. This thing slid off the hood and onto the dirt road. Throwing the truck into reverse, the father floored the gas pedal and put some distance between them and the thing, backing into the weeds off the road. He then put the truck into first and stepped on it again. Whatever this thing was, it was coming up on them fast. They said it almost looked like a wild animal with an incredible look of rage and hatred in its eyes. The truck sprayed dirt off from the road at the beast as they pulled out, slowing it down just enough for them to get away. The donkey lady had finally dropped back and headed into the weeds. After the story was told, my friend let it be known that he thought it was a nice story. But then he was taken outside and shown the truck. The windshield was almost knocked out, the hood was dented, and its paint was scuffed and scraped. So if you ever visit San Antonio, aside from going to the Riverwalk and many attractions around, and the creepy haunted places, stay away from camping sites. You might just encounter the donkey lady. It was a dark, clear night within a 45-minute drive from Big Sandy, Texas. A roommate, her boyfriend, and I went to find a place to have a couple of drinks and hang out. We drove for a while and were headed back to Big Sandy when the boyfriend said he had to take a leak. So of course, we told him to pull off to the side of the road. Not much later, he saw a sign for a cemetery, but I can't remember the name, or else I would tell you all. It was a very wooded area, and the cemetery was gated. However, the gates were open. The cemetery was up an incline and couldn't be seen from the road. My roommate and I were completely creeped out and kept telling him to turn back. He made the excuse of it was too tight to turn back, and he promised us it would be okay. So we kept going. About 3 to 5 minutes later, up the dirt road was a clearing with a few trees. In the moonlight and car lights, we could see a small mausoleum, gravestones, and more gravestones ahead of us in a very dark road. My roommate's boyfriend then jumped out to go take a leak behind a large man-sized headstone, and we were left in the car. I don't know why, but I decided to get out of the car for a second, but it was so quiet, and all these woods in East Texas are never quiet. I got a little bit creeped out of the whole situation, so I jumped back in. As we were both sitting in the car, waiting for her boyfriend to come back, my roommate then tells me, "Hey, do you see that in front of us?" Mind you, it's pretty dark, but I tell her where, and she points ahead of us, about 50 yards away. As I focus deep into the darkness, I see something. A dark shadow, pitch black, more darker than the surrounding area. But what stood out was, it looked like the shadow of a human, but it was weird. It was about 2 to 3 feet tall. We then saw it move. We screamed out the window for our friend to hurry. In the 5 seconds that it took us to scream, this thing, or creature, started running towards us. As it was getting closer, we were screaming more, and my roommate's boyfriend jumped back in the car. And before he peeled back out, we were going in reverse, and this thing was just standing there. We all saw it, and then it walked away. It disappeared back into the woods to our right. We never saw it on the way back out the cemetery again. Nobody said a single word on the way back. My friends refused to talk about it after, and no one believed me, but I know what I saw, and they know what they saw. However, I do wish I could remember the name of the cemetery so that you all could go as well. This is 100% real. I'm from Abilene, Texas, just under 200 miles west of Dallas. I'm 25, and my older cousin I'm going to mention is 30. We have family in San Antonio that we visit every year in the summer. And when I say I mean my grandmother and her daughters, my mom being one of them, and the rest of her sisters, and all their kids, my dad, and my sister, my wife, and kid, etc. We have a pretty big family, so we make a vacation out of it. We enjoy the water parks and have barbecue and things of that sort. So basically, to not make this too long, some of us took off to San Antonio around lunchtime, one Friday, the weekend of our vacation. Now typically, it's about a 3.5 hour drive if I'm in no rush, and even 4 hour trip. Some of the family left around noon and made it by 4. But me and my cousin, his name is, well, we'll call him Steven. Me and Steven couldn't leave till we got off work Friday around 5:30 to 6. So we left around the same time, which was 7:30. We didn't plan that. He has his own family and I have mine. We also both had one kid at the time and are both still married. So we hit the road, and 1/3 of the way there in Brady, Texas, we noticed each other at the gas station. What are the odds, right? So we were laughing, and he took off as I went inside and told him I wanted 20 on number 3. I always like to have more than enough fuel on road trips. So after I filled up and checked the baby and wife and make sure that everything is good, we get back on the road. The sun has faded away and it's almost pitch black now. If anyone has driven 283 south, it turns into US 87 just after Mason, Texas, all the way to Fredericksburg, Texas. And basically, the only light for that 1.5 hour strip is your headlight, and that's where it happened. So we're cruising, and there's deer signs every 10 miles or so, because there's so many of them on that strip. So with my aftermarket headlights on my 2013 GMC Sierra, it's very well lit, so I feel comfortable knowing that I'm driving safe in case I see something run out from the side of the road. And just after Mason is when I saw it. So I'm driving south, and this thing is walking north in the direction towards me, on the same side of the road as well. So it was on the passenger side of the truck as we passed. It was walking all the way to the side of the road, but not quite on the grass either. My wife was on her phone as I said, "Did you see that?" She said, "See what?" Now keep this in mind. I just previously mentioned it's pitch black. I haven't seen a car on the side of the road, much less a house or ranch, for the last 10 minutes or so. So I can't really describe. What I saw was a human body with a sheet over it. It seemed to be human legs and feet, but I couldn't really tell because I was going 77 and it happened so fast. But it looked like human skin and flesh from the shins down, including toes. And I watched it as it took 3 or 4 strides. It didn't seem very large in size, maybe 5'9" or 6 feet at best. Not bony, not obese. Also, I didn't see arms. It was literally a whole white sheet looking fabric over its whole body. I mentioned the height because of the Skinwalker talk. But what freaked me out the most is how or why would some sick bastard pull a prank like this? If they did, where did they live? I'm talking about some Jeepers Creepers bus scene back road driving, that kind of empty. Another thing to mention is that the sheet didn't have holes cut out for the eyes. So how did it see in pitch black? And whatever this thing is, how did it know not to walk in the middle of the street? I had so many questions, but I didn't want to freak the wife out, so I just floored it. I started going around 105 and had to calm myself down because I kept looking in the rear view mirror looking for headlights on some Jeepers Creepers shit again. I don't know why I keep referencing that movie because I haven't seen it in like 5 years. But still, here's the best part. I got over it when we got to the family's house and showered and got all settled in. And that's when I went outside to go chill with the family and catch up. And that's when I overheard Steven telling them what happened on the drive over between Mason and Fredericksburg. And that's when every hair on my neck and arms stood up. And it just did again as I'm typing this. The picture is so vivid and the feeling is so real. I looked at Steven and I asked to describe what he saw, and he described exactly what I saw as well. We were so surprised. Again, could it have been some weirdo playing a game? A ghost? How cliche with the whole white sheet thing, right? Or a real serial killer waiting for someone to turn around? I don't know, but for damn sure, I wasn't gonna be the one to ask him if he needed help. So from this day on, I refuse to ever drive to or from San Antonio, Texas after dark. Have y'all ever seen anything like this in South Texas? Comment and let me know. Thank you for reading my true story. Have a great night. I live right next to a Navajo reservation and have made friends with many of the people there my age. We like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teens. I walk over a lot since my best friend lives a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek, and it only takes about 25 to 30 minutes. I have made this trip dozens of times and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge. There is a patch of forest, however, about midway there. It's a little unnerving sometimes. There is always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I try to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind playing tricks on me. This day, I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left, it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey through. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams, there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation, so I whispered, "Hello?" Hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips, I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but it was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back and the sound of my voice. "Hello?" My heart pounded against my chest. I felt like I was gonna faint. "Hello?" My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream. I couldn't reply. "Hello? Hello? 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 Hello?" As my voice echoed over and over from a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. "Hello? Hello? 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 Hello?" It repeated. "Stop it!" I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent. For a long minute, nothing happened. The air grew stale, and I realized for the first time that there was no typical forest sound. There were no bugs, no frogs, or crickets. Nothing. I stood there, terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. "Stop it!" it mimicked back. I had enough and was willing my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard some rustling in the bushes 20 feet to my left. I watched as a deer head with huge antlers protruded through the brush as it came further out and stood up on twos. I took off. I flew out of the woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room, laid down, and thought about what happened. My mom came in at some point and asked me if everything was alright. I replied yes, I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I was afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me that no matter what happened that night, to not reply or look out my window. But this terrified me even more. He said to call him the next morning and he would explain more, and that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake, listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, the air changed. The night sounds got quiet. I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers over my head like a child, far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. "Hello?" I cried. It was all I could do. "Hello? Stop it!" It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said. But then, it did something new. It called my name. "Amy." My mother's voice. "Amy! Amy! Come here! Hello? Stop it!" My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up around 12 to my friend calling to tell me he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what happened to me. He said there was a creature that they called Yi Naudroshi, or he who goes on all fours, or a skinwalker. He explained that it was an evil witch that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required, and that this witch had caught my scent and knew me now. I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, and that I would always have to be careful. Last night, I heard scratching on my window. Then, a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said in my mother's voice. At one point, it started calling my name, but drawing it out really far, like "Amy." It tried to get me to come outside or to open the door and let it into my house. This went on all night. At this point, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is this thing seriously going to stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I can take that.